The very best that we can do is to continue to tax the populace, the citizenry, in order to just merely service our debt. Hello YouTubers, Alaska Prepper here. Ladies and gentlemen, I ran into this article, and this is definitely a must read. I'm going to leave the link to this article under the description of this video. However, I'm going to read it for you all. That way, if you just want to listen to it, you can. The title of this article is How Empires End. And you're going to be astonished at how similar the circumstances under which other empires ended are to the circumstances that we are living through right now here in the United States of America, and I'm sure in other countries around the world. Histories are generally written by academics. They quite naturally tend to focus on the main events, the wars and the struggles between leaders and their opponents. While these are interesting stories to read, academics, by their very nature, often overlook the underlying causes for an empire's decline. Today, as in any era, most people are primarily interested in the news, the daily information regarding the world's political leaders and their struggles with one another to obtain, retain, and expand their power. When the history is written about the era we are passing through, it will reflect, in large measure, a rehash of the news. As the media of the day tend to overlook the fact that the present events are merely symptoms of an overall decline, so historians tend to focus on major events rather than the slow operations that have been underlying the cause. The Persian Empire. When as a boy I was educated about the decline and fall of the Persian Empire, I was learned of the final takeover by Alexander the Great, but was never told that in its decline, Persian taxes became heavier and more oppressive, leading to economic depression and revolts, which in turn led to even heavier taxes and increased repression. Increasingly, kings hoarded gold and silver, keeping it out of circulation from the community. This hamstrung the market, as monetary circulation was insufficient to conduct business. By the time Alexander came along, Persia, weakened by warfare and internal economic strife, was a shell of an empire and was relatively easy to defeat. The Tang Dynasty. Back then, I also learned that the Tang Dynasty ended as a result of the increased power among the eunuchs, battles with Fanzan separatists, and finally peasants' revolts. True enough, but I was not taught that the dynasty's expansion-based warfare demanded increased taxation, which led to revolts. Continued warfare necessitated increasing monetary and land extortion by the eunuchs, resulting in an abrupt decrease in food output and further taxes. Finally, as economic deterioration and oppression of the citizenry worsened, citizens left the area entirely for more promise elsewhere. Is there a pattern here? Let's have a more detailed look at another empire. Now, ladies and gentlemen, from what I just read, ask yourselves, is there a pattern there of empires falling? I believe it was Lincoln that said something close to the following, that if America falls, it will not be from an outside invader, that it will be from within, meaning that we will destroy ourselves, that no one needs to come in and destroy us. In 1556, Philip II of Spain inherited what was regarded as Europe's most wealthy nation, with no apparent economic problems. Yet by 1598, Spain was bankrupt. How was this possible? Spain was doing well, but sought to become a major power. To achieve this, Philip needed more tax dollars. Beginning in 1561, the existing servicio tax was regularized, and the cruzada tax, the excusado tax, and the millions tax were all added by 1590. Over a period of 39 years, taxes increased by 430%. Although the elite of the day were exempt from taxation, the average citizen was taxed to the point that both business expansion and public purchasing diminished dramatically. Wages did not keep pace with the resultant inflation. The price of goods rose 400%, causing a price revolution and a tax revolution. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this paragraph right here says it all. I was talking about this on yesterday's Alaska Prepper News video, that when taxes are increased so much that innovation seeks elsewhere to exist, meaning that those people that innovate and bring value to our society no longer want to innovate because there is nothing in it for them, meaning that they are not rewarded for their efforts. Although Spain enjoyed a flood of gold and silver from the Americas at this time, the increased wealth went straight into Philippe's war efforts. However, the 100,000 troops were soon failing to return sufficient spoils to Philippe to pay for their forays abroad. In a final effort to float the doomed empire, Philippe issued government bonds, which provided immediate cash but created tremendous debt that presumably would need to be repaid one day. The debt grew 8.8 times their gross domestic product. Sound familiar, ladies and gentlemen? This is the stuff that they don't teach in school. That's the point of this article. We are finding ourselves in the same place that other empires throughout the history of mankind have found themselves. However, since these fine points are not taught in school, we are finding ourselves here all over again. Even though history is there for us to learn from, we refuse to learn from history. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, with a debt that is 8.8 times GDP, Spain finally declared bankruptcy. Their trade slipped to other countries. The military, fighting on 3 fronts, went unpaid, and military aspirations collapsed. It is important to note that even as the empire was collapsing, Philippe did not suspend warfare. He did not back off taxation. Like leaders before him and since, he insisted stubbornly to increase his autocracy as the empire slipped into collapse. Meaning, ladies and gentlemen, that government will never admit their fails. They will just continue to struggle forward even though they know that they are headed towards a cliff. Now we get into present day empires. Now, ladies and gentlemen, pay attention to this part, because this part is almost a mirror image of what we here in the United States, and I would say most countries around the world, are going through right now. Again, these events above are not taught to school children as being of key importance in the decline of empires, even though they are remarkably consistent with the decline of other empires and what we are seeing today. The very same events occur, falling like dominoes, more or less in order, in any empire and in any age. The first one is the government leaders habitually exceed their grasp. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, if we want to go ahead and match this number 1 to our government today, how has the government over the last several decades, and it doesn't matter what administration is in power, how have they treated the Constitution? I would say that that constitutes exactly what number 1 is saying, how the government leaders habitually exceed their grasp. Number 2, dramatic expansion, and generally through warfare, is undertaken without a clear plan as to how that expansion is to be financed. Sound familiar, ladies and gentlemen? I mean, we know exactly how our expansions are financed. They're financed through taxation, either direct or through the taxation which is known as inflation. Number 3, The population is overtaxed as the bills for expansion become due, without consideration as to whether the population can afford increased taxation. Number 4, heavy taxation causes investment by the private sector to diminish, and the economy begins to decline. Again, ladies and gentlemen, the more that businesses are taxed, the less that they can innovate, the less that they can expand their business to hire more people to produce more value towards an economy. Number 5, the inevitable happens. The cost of goods rise, and without wages keeping pace. Sound familiar? Incredible how accurate this is. And this, ladies and gentlemen, has happened throughout history, and we refuse to learn. Number 6, tax revenue declines as the economy declines due to excessive taxation. Taxes are increased again in order to top up government revenues. Number 7, in spite of all of the above, government leaders personally hoard as much as they can, further limiting the circulation of wealth in the business community. Number 8, governments issue bonds and otherwise borrow to continue expansion with no plans as to repayment. And how many of our political representatives, ladies and gentlemen, have you heard say that it doesn't matter how high our national debt is? Number 9, dramatic authoritarian control is instituted to assure that the public continues to comply with demands, even if those demands cannot be met by the public. Number 10, economic and social collapse occurs, often marked by unrest, the collapse of the economy, and the exit of those who are productive. Again, ladies and gentlemen, people are mobile. If there is a person or a corporation or a company that is not being treated well in one geographical area, they will just pick up and move to another. Look at Elon Musk. He's moving from California to Texas. Look at Ford. They announced here a month or two ago that they're moving one of their plants from the United States to Mexico. Why is that? It's because they're not being treated well here. So they're going to move somewhere else where they are treated better. Number 11, and this is important, ladies and gentlemen, because this is coming down the line. In this final period, the empire turns on itself, treating its people as the enemy. The above review suggests that if our school books stress the underlying causes of empire collapse, rather than the names of famous generals and the dates of famous battles, we might be better educated and be less likely to repeat the same mistakes. Unfortunately, this is unlikely. Chances are future leaders will be just as uninterested in learning from history as past leaders. They will create empires, then destroy them. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, is that people make up empires. And just like the empire that is called these United States of America, it is made up of people and governed by a measly 537 leaders. And those leaders, ladies and gentlemen, when the empire collapses and crumbles onto itself, trust me, they will not suffer nearly as much as the people who they were presumably leading. Even the most informative histories of empire decline, such as the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, will not be of interest to the leaders of empires. They will believe that they are above history and that they uniquely will succeed. If there is any value in learning from the above, it is the understanding that leaders will not be dissuaded from their aspirations. They will only continue to charge ahead, both literally and figuratively, regardless of objections and revolts from the citizenry. Once an empire has reached stage 8 above, it never reverses. And stage 8, ladies and gentlemen, is governments issue bonds and otherwise borrow to continue expansion with no plans to repayment. That is exactly where we're at We are borrowing like there is no tomorrow, and we have absolutely no plan to repay any of our debts. The very best that we can do is to continue to tax the populace, the citizenry, in order to just merely service our debt. It is a dead empire walking, and only awaits the painful playing out of the final 3 stages. At that point, it is foolhardily in the extreme to remain and wait it out, in the hope that the decline will somehow reverse. At that point, the wiser choice might be to follow the cue of the Chinese, the Romans, and others, who instead chose to quietly exit for greener pastures elsewhere. The only problem that I have with that last statement, ladies and gentlemen, is what Ronald Reagan said in one of his speeches. And he said, if America falls, where do we go? Where else is there to go if America falls? People come to the United States of America because they want to come here to have a higher standard of living, to have more freedoms in order to achieve that higher standing of living. But where do we go if we fall into the grasp of history as stated above through the fall of empires? We have nowhere else to go, ladies and gentlemen. Remember to be good to each other. When good people do good things happen. Remember to reach one, teach one, and repeat. If we all did this, the world would be a better place, and you know that it will be a better place. Many blessings to all of you and your families. This is Alaska Prepper. I am out.